It's quite astounding, the audacity of the Labor Party when it comes to criticising the federal government on support for the tourism industry and support for the Australian economy as a whole. Now, this package announced last week by the Morrison government of $1.2 billion is just a drop in the ocean compared to what we have spent overall. Now, it's interesting, this time last week I was up in Cairns. I spent a week up in North Queensland last week, and the Palaszczuk government came out and announced $200 vouchers just for the city of Cairns. Right now, Cairns happens to be all Labor-held state seats. Did we come out and accuse the Labor government, the state Labor government, of pork barrelling or anything like that? No, absolutely not. All we happened to point out was that while the state Labor government was sticking a whopping $3 million into the economy of Cairns, we had previously, in the last 12 months, invested or injected over $800 million into the city of Cairns. I mean, that's over 25 times more than what the state Labor government is going to be doing over the next few months. So for the Labor Party to be sitting here and saying that the federal government is actually putting the tourist sector at risk is not true at all. And it's worth noting that if any industry has been impacted by the inconsistencies displayed by the state governments, especially the state Labor governments, because in the main it's been the state Labor governments, the three big ones, Victoria, Queensland and WA, who've kept their borders closed, and who kept flip-flopping as to when borders were open and as to when borders were closed. And it was interesting, just at the start of this year, I got an enormous amount of feedback. I got trolled big time by, of course, the Labor trolls and the digital lynch mob on social media. But late last year, we had the Chief Medical Officer of Queensland come out and say, we don't need to lock down again, we've got this under control. We go for 130 days with no cases, and then we have one case, just one case in quarantine that, so the source of it was known. And what did the State Premier do, the Queensland State Premier do? At 9 o'clock on Friday morning, she came out and said she's going to lock down the city of Brisbane to over 2 million people at 5 o'clock that afternoon. Now, thousands of workers in the hospitality industry were directly impacted by that. Now, what we've got to remember here is this was the first week back this year. A lot of businesses were restarting. They were going to make a fresh start, a new year. They get to Friday, the first weekend of the year, and what happens? The state Labor government shuts down Brisbane, resulting in the loss of thousands and thousands, if not, I suspect, millions of dollars in losses for the hospitality industry. Now, we heard when we were talking about the aviation sector, we had the CEO of Virgin come out and call for the state governments to have a consistent framework in regards to, number one, border closures, and number two, the restrictions on hospitality venues across the country. Now, I've also got a very good friend of mine who's a leading Australian musician who has personally called me and asked for some consistency in the restrictions across the states. He had a gig to play in Adelaide. I got a call from on the weekend. This is going back a few weeks ago. He had a gig to play in Adelaide. He got Victoria shut the border with South Australia shut the border with Victoria again, and suddenly he was short a bass player. And it was all booked. The event was all booked, and then he had to ring around and try and find someone to come and play at that event. And this is the sort of inconsistency that is leading to a lack of confidence in the hospitality sector and the tourism sector in opening up. Now, it's worth noting that as we head into winter this year, this is a fantastic opportunity for southerners, especially from New South Wales and Victoria, to fly north to Queensland. Now, they would have loved to have done that last year, and at one point the Premier opened up and then closed down again. But this is the perfect opportunity to keep the borders open this year. Now, what we've got to remember with the tourism sector is for about the last 15 years, more people have left Australia than entered into Australia. We've actually had a deficit in the tourist numbers. So what we have is a net tourist deficit, so more departures than arrivals. So there is an opportunity now, with the international borders closed, to promote internal tourism across the country, and there is an opportunity for the higher spenders who normally would go overseas, for them to come up to Queensland or vice versa. It is very important that the state premiers apply consistency. We've now got the vaccine rolling out, which should hopefully, as the year rolls on, we'll get that out. So we should have contact tracing and testing in place. We've got our numbers across the country down to single digits outside of quarantine. So there is absolutely no reason why the state premiers can't give some confidence to our hospitality industry and to our tourism sector. And it was interesting. I know Senator Polley before said that you've got to have a job to be able to spend money to go on a holiday. And it's interesting because I thought to myself, you've actually got to have a job to get superannuation as well. So one thing I'm not going to take from the Labor Party is the lack of universality in this particular package, given that they promote superannuation despite the fact that unemployed people, stay-at-home mums, people on disability pension don't get superannuation either. And the other thing, of course, is the idea that tourist operators will miss out on this is not true. People aren't going to go travelling and do nothing when they get there. They're going to, for example, arrive in Cairns, they'll go in, they'll book a scuba diving trip, they might book a trip up to Port Douglas, they might go out in a boat, they might take some tours inland to see Daintree Forest. All of those things, they can walk in off the street if they want to book something. So there is still opportunity for travel agents, to get some spin-off effects of this. And likewise, they're not going to sit in their hotel room and eat room service every night. They're going to go out and they're going to eat at these venues. So the idea that this money has been misallocated or wasted is just more fear-mongering and negativity from those opposite us. And quite frankly, I think the whole premise in which this MPI is based is completely false. And I touched on the numbers before in Cairns, and I'll just touch on them again. The state Labor government is putting $3 million into Cairns for tourism. In the last year alone, the federal government has put over $800 million in. But if we just look at the Queensland overall, the federal government has put $28.5 billion, $28.5 billion into Queensland. Now, what has the state Labor government done? They're putting in a measly $8.8 billion over the forward estimates. And can I say, if the Labor Party and their state Labor colleagues are so worried about creating jobs, well, let me tell you the one key message I got out of North Queensland last week, and that is we need more water. We need more water. And the state Labor government has only built 2 dams in the last 30 years. One of those dams, Paradise Dam, they're now pulling down, or not quite pulling down, they're halving the size of the wall, so they're going to reduce the size of that dam. And one other dam in Bow Desert where they've actually got the water wrong, the water's brackish. So the people of North Queensland are calling out for more water security. I saw the Mayor of Port Douglas last weekend. He needs a lake. Port Douglas could actually run out of water very soon if the state Labor government doesn't get busy and build a bigger lake for Port Douglas to have some water supply. So there's a great opportunity here to take that capacity in the labour market and go and build some dams. Now, I'm happy to go to the Treasurer and get an infrastructure bank up and running to fund the states to build these dams. Okay, but we've got to remember it's wealth for toil. It's wealth for toil. So here is a perfect opportunity to create more jobs, long-lasting jobs. There's so many benefits of water security. We get irrigation. There's benefits for agriculture. We get clean, green hydro energy. How good is that? Clean, green hydro energy. We get flood mitigation. I mean, that will help reduce the risk and reduce insurance costs in North Queensland. We get recreational activities like water skiing. I know my hometown, on the weekends in Chinchilla, we used to all go out to the weir and do water skiing and whatnot and kayak back up the mighty Condamine. So there is a great opportunity here to get busy, build dams. It's wealth for toil. It's not wealth for whinging and wailing, which is what all we ever seem to get from the Labor Party. And it's about time they got with the program and started to look forward and have a vision for this country rather than looking backwards.